report that the third display copy is permanently under review, so they're no longer available on the desk, but you can still order them. Now, this afternoon's concluding presentation is a winner, really fascinating. Real-life experiments, we've heard a lot today about what fire experiments should involve. The fire department has conducted fascinating experiments, and only a few weeks ago here in the Netherlands, in Zutphen, they used real homes setting a floor on fire. I observed, and the only thing I can say is I hope the weather is better next time. I'm not going to disclose what I saw during the experiments because I only watched one. And I'm delighted to give the floor on this to the couple that will tell you about that, Ricardo Wever, a lecturer from the Fire Academy and a professor at the Eindhoven Technical University.
Goedemiddag, collega's.
Good afternoon. Well, being one of the final speakers is a challenge and a drawback. I'm delighted to link this to everything you've heard in the past 2 days. I can really highlight that. But the drawback is we're running late, so I hope you'll bear with me. Are you all still raring to go? And I'll throw in some exercises to keep it lively. And I've been asked a special question too because our foreign guests need to jump in a cab at 4:15 to go to Schiphol. So toward the end of the presentation, I'm going to switch over because I wanted to show you some of the experiments in Zutphen, and I thought that would be the icing on the cake. I was going to do that with Ruud van Herben, but now we're going to move that up a bit. We'll have to work with the people at the rear, so don't be surprised if I suddenly skip to the end of my presentation and then move back again. But please bear with me. What I thought of in advance was, of course, I'll deal in detail with the experiment that we all conduct in the field at the Fire Academy, but let's talk about why, because it's not just because the lecturer has fun doing it. We try to make those experiments very realistic so that the people who are going to be fighting the fires benefit from them. And I'd love to show you how this came about, because since 2010, we've talked about firefighting tomorrow. I'm sure you've heard about it. And I'll repeat that for our foreign guests because they may not be as aware of it. And at a certain point, the fire department said there's so many trends we can't keep up. We're ready to innovate our model. And we've thought of several innovations, especially the new firefighting doctrine that I'll tell you more about in a moment. This is important because at the time they said, if we want to innovate that firefighting model, we need to conduct more research, and that basically paves the way for everything that we're doing. I'm sure you remember that there was a time when the fire department did very little research and based everything on experience and practice, but the firefighting tomorrow has changed that, and it's important to realize that that's the reason. The firefighting doctrine comprised 3 schools. One was prevention, so you have to know what causes them and how to prevent them. Then there's also the risk-based effect of risk control, which is different from review to advice, but you need knowledge for that. And then there's new suppression. That's what we're going to talk about. That's what the FSS-Congress is really about. And what we achieved while we were devising the doctrine, that we're merging prevention with suppression. So it's one discipline. Firefighting is both prevention and suppression, and that is reflected throughout this Congress, the link between prevention and suppression, not only science, but also knowledge together with craftsmanship. And that's the leitmotif. I hope all of you recognize this. When we talk about new suppression, the three highlights, which I hardly need to explain anymore, are as follows. Those of you who were with us yesterday won't need me to explain this because Steve Kerbin did an admirable job explaining this. I could never emulate that. It's the need to conduct research on modern fires, and the target is to find new methods of coping with fires today, safeguarding the health of our co-workers who have to do the work. There's some things that we can't do. We heard Fred Hart about that. So we're not in control of those car parks yet, and everybody needs to understand that. That concerns prevention. Now, as for changes, I hardly need to explain after what we heard yesterday. Fires have changed, and not all of our co-workers in the field are aware of this, but many things have changed. We need to keep up with those if we want to work safely. We realized that only after the punt in 2008, and we suddenly took a look to see what was going on. It's not just about a fire in a building. The building can be on fire, or those smoke clouds are huge, and they have a far greater social impact. Are our preventive assumptions still correct with respect to buildings? Do they correspond with practice? We heard a lot about that yesterday, and we did today too. That's what we focus our research on. The observation that all kinds of things have changed mean that the fire departments in the Netherlands and the Fire Academy have devised a quadrant system which shows our co-workers that they don't always need to run in. Sometimes it may not be safe, sometimes it may be ineffective, but there are other options. And the quadrant model presents two strategies that you could apply when you go to fight a fire. And they may say, well, that's wonderful, but how do you do that? That's why we conduct all this research, and most research conducted presently at the Fire Academy is to figure out how to implement the best of these four methods in practice. We have different ways. This is our model. What I'd like to emphasize is that if you want to innovate and develop a new routine, you need to start by understanding the process of fires and the causes. You need to understand everything. We heard various lectures about that yesterday and today. We don't know everything yet in detail, and we can always come up with new situations that are just slightly different. The question is whether we'll ever have comprehensive knowledge, but we need to learn more. This is how we do it. I heard Bart Mercier's appeal yesterday. He said, these models are wonderful, but the proof of the pudding is not in the eating because we don't have enough data to see whether our models are right. We operate according to a triptych. The first is fire investigation. Teams throughout the country that have been gathering important information both about the causes and the course of fire for years. We're learning a lot from them now. The second thing we do consists of the experiments. I'm sure you've heard of them, and I'll tell you more about them later on. The practical experiments where you examine the course of a fire under standardized circumstances and the effect of our extinguishing techniques. And next you have simulations, and you need to include all of them. I remember talking to the expert Udit van Herpen, who knows all about fire engineering and simulations. I asked him, can you devise a model for me to come up with experiments and having an advanced insight into the result? He said, I can't do that. I was surprised. He said, I have models, but we have to include assumptions and parameters, and I don't always know whether I get the parameters right. So he said, why don't you start with the experiments, and then I can come up with the right models. So those models and simulations and practice, they all go together, and we've established that link, and I hope that after we've talked about the Zutphen experiment, I can ask Guru to jump in and show how we're crystallizing this, and then we'll follow up on Bart Mercier's appeal yesterday about gaining far more practice to devise the simulation models. But if you get those models right, you might be able to skip a few practical experiments by using the models for predictive purposes. Now, what's incredibly important is that a lot is already going on, but sharing that knowledge can be disappointing. I hope that we've taken a very good step today because we've featured prominent speakers who have a lot of research experience and have shared their knowledge with you. And that's the role we envisage for the Fire Academy. A Fire Academy ensures that knowledge is disclosed all over the world, not only for the upper echelons of society, but for everybody in the workplace, so that soon the YouTube page of the Fire Academy will feature all presentations. So join that YouTube group, take those videos to your workplace and talk with your coworkers about them, because that's what we want to achieve, following the UL example. Just as Steve Kerbin did in the US, we're trying to do the same by providing access to knowledge for everybody online, and we hope that you'll take that back to the workplace. And partnering up with Underwriters Laboratories is incredibly important. We've greatly benefited from their knowledge, and we're trying to complement it, and we consult with them to find out which types of experiments they'll do and which ones we'll do, so we're trying to coordinate that. In addition to the UL, at Eindhoven and Delft engineering schools, we're trying to streamline a knowledge network and remain in touch about these matters. Now, this may look a bit confusing to you. Can all of you read it? No, you don't really need to, because this should be somewhat recognizable to you. It should ring some bells. That's the quadrant model. You see the different starting up strategies, and you see the command and control, the entire procedural team that's operating nationwide. That's all interesting, but how do you do this for your command structure and your exploration? Because in the past, you could just decide to go in and out, and now you need to decide whether to be defensive in the interior or defensive from outside. So defensive inside attack, defensive outside attack, offensive inside attack, or offensive outside attack. But I'm going to start at the back of the story, and then I'll get back to this part so that at least our foreign guests will have seen the story about Zutphen, and of course that's the icing on the cake. So you'll get your dessert before you get your main course, is what he's saying. Now click on the lower right. That's it. Back one, I think. And one more. Another one. There we are. You can't possibly have missed it that 2 weeks ago we had a week of experiments in Zutphen. That was a unique opportunity. We had to do realistic simulations in the field. Ordinarily we can't do that because you've all heard different speakers. Stefan Svensson mentioned that it's often very tricky to do tests that simulate practice. So we performed some experiments, and usually we do it in containers. But then we decided, well, we've learned an awful lot, but do we have the responses that they need in the field? Because the people in the field want to know how we're going to do this. Well, we've learned a lot of interesting things, but we don't really have the answers yet. So we decided that we want far more realistic experiments with the flashover fires in brick buildings. And then it's nice if somebody says, I know a little development somewhere. I'm saying this very lightly, but it took an awful lot of hard thought to make sure that we could really do those experiments there, because people tend to get upset when they see huge clouds of smoke. And even the weekend before we got started, a little house had burned down because somebody thought they would beat the fire department to it. So in the last week, we had to sort that one out. I'll spare you the details, but the experiment worked like a charm. And some people think, okay, the Fire Academy has investigated and figured it out because they conducted experiments in Zutphen, and now we know the course of a fire and the speed and how quick we have to be to rescue lives. No, this was not a scientific experiment that yielded statistical evidence about what you should do. It's not a one-size-fits-all. What we demonstrated in these experiments is that there's no single answer. 2 years ago, I was innocent enough to think that we knew everything, so we weren't going to investigate everything. That's the way it is. And then Stefan Svensson said, it depends. And I figured that that's never going to work. Well, unfortunately, if you were to ask me, what's the story, Ricardo? I'd say, it depends. And we saw that in Zutphen. We opted for 6 realistic scenarios there. A fire in a bedroom, a few fires in a living room, and a fire in the kitchen, where we also simulated what would happen if the occupant discovered the fire and fled. What would happen when he opened the door? And we also checked, not because we didn't believe Steve Kerben, but just to see whether we would have the same experience. What happens if your bedroom door is shut and something happens downstairs? What happens if you open the upstairs door and close it if there's a fire downstairs? Will that increase your survival time? Because the video that Steve played is really neat, and it's possible if you have enough oxygen and you set your couch on fire, then you may have a flashover, but the fire doesn't always start in the couch, and there isn't always a lot of oxygen. Well, we found the opposite, because in all the scenarios, which I won't review one by one, and this really frustrated the people from the press. They all thought we were going to get some really great scenes, and we invited the media to show up on Tuesday, but they showed up on Monday. Well, they got very frustrated because they only saw a few tiny little wisps of smoke coming out of the bedroom. So they were not entirely disappointed, but they were quite disappointed. And then there were sponsors, the VIPs, funding this study. They didn't see any flames either. And we had about 40 people wandering around the site, all fire people. That's one of our intentions, involved as many people from practicing these type of fires, and they were all waiting outside. We even had people standing up on a high rise in the pouring rain, and then they went back to work the next day. That's how much they enjoyed it. So sometimes after we had gathered enough data, we said, let's see what happens if you open a door. And that did lead to some interesting fire developments after the VIPs left. So the media thinks that fires can be underventilated, but very tiny things such as a window that bangs or a catch that's just a bit further away, that really determines the course of a fire. And that's what we wanted to anticipate. Now, just to give you an impression of what happened, the scenes of the homes and the measurement equipment, we had 4 different screens with measurement devices, and we have 5 gigabytes of data. So people are asking us, are you done? And you may hope that I can show you everything now. No, I won't. I can give you a sample, but we're working very, very hard to analyze all those data. And it's progressing far faster than I imagined. At the left, you see what the living room looked like. I'm sure nobody could get in there anymore. I won't tell you where we bought the furniture we put in that little house, but you could do the same thing tomorrow. It's all in the report, and sometimes we saw the flames coming out after we encouraged them a bit, and then you see what remains, and not very much remains, as you can see. I had a video, and that will take some mental exercise. Are we ready for that? Well, that was the wrong signal, because it was recorded on an iPhone, but I thought It was so cool. It turns out that the media players don't know what to do. They keep reversing the video. And no matter what I do, I thought it was fun, especially because we've been standing here watching. We were standing watching a bedroom fire for 45 to 60 minutes. You can see that a fire had started at the bed in the front bedroom, and at the rear there was a children's bedroom, and that door was also open. You can see that the bed caught fire and smoke came out the window, and that just kept going on. And we said, okay, we've seen enough. And then there was a tough fireman who said, now let's see if Steve Kerbin is right. We're going to throw the front door open. And I'd like to show you what happens then. And let's see if it'll work by clicking on that video. So you'll need to turn 90 degrees. Should we practice seeing whether we can turn 90 degrees? I couldn't make this visible in any other way. Okay, please click on the video. It's only a 2-minute film. Does it work? Or should I come do it? There we go. Okay. See? Here you see the bedroom. And you see little wisps of smoke for a long time, and sometimes you see some suction, and then it stops, and then it suctions in more oxygen, and that mattress is smoldering, but the fire simply doesn't flash over elsewhere, and the front door is still closed. Maybe you'd like to fast forward it. Could this take a while? We were watching it for about an hour. Yeah, stop about there. Very good. Because then my coworker opened the door. And when I asked my coworkers wandering around whether they'd ever seen that, they all say they have, but they hardly ever say anything about it. Everybody recognized what was happening here. And I don't know who of you attended Steve's workshop. We basically already knew this, but it didn't really become common knowledge in our suppression service. See how quickly this happens? It very rapidly blackens. I don't think they're upstairs yet because they're still looking on the ground floor. That's what we were taught. Here it is. And it was smoldering for 45 minutes. You open the door and then you see how little time you have left. And the coworkers who were there were shocked. We tried this a few times, and my coworkers were shocked at the rapid rise in temperature and flashover of this fire. Okay, this was the example. I have a few more of those examples. What we're going to do now with these images, both at the front and at the back, we had professionals recording the videos, including heat sensor cameras. We want to put together a wonderful online course so that everybody can use the explanatory notes, as you saw from Yoel about the Governance Islands experiments, which were translated into Dutch and will be disclosed in consultation with Yoel in the Dutch versions. We're going to do the same with these experiments.
Even tijd, gun ons even de tijd daarvoor. Ik kan je wel al even laten zien de eerste, hoe die grafieken eruit zien. Want dit zijn dan per brand, hebben we dus dit soort grafieken. Hè. Er zijn er een aantal nu uitgewerkt. Hè, dit zijn wat we gemeten hebben, de NOx, de koolmonoxide, de zuurstof, de straling en de temperatuur. Nou, Hans Hazebroek, de projectleider, die zit hier in het midden. Die heeft de afgelopen weken koortsachtig gewerkt om een paar van die grafieken. Want je kunt je voorstellen dat je die ook nog moet knippen en plakken en toonbaar maken. En weet ik veel, voordat je überhaupt aan analyse toekomt. Maar dit is een beetje zoals, dit zijn typerende grafieken. En je ziet hier ook inderdaad die grafieken die je ook vanuit Underwriters Laboratories wel zag. Hè, dat onder geventileerd raken van die brand, zuurstofconcentratie die afneemt. Die dan vervolgens weer even toeneemt en weer afneemt. Nou, dat soort mooie plaatjes hebben wij dus straks zelf in Nederland ook. En die gaan we uiteraard weer met het buitenland delen. Nou, wat nou aardig is dat...
The interesting thing is that here for the first time we asked students at the Technical University of Eindhoven to work with us. We did 6 scenarios, and there may be thousands of these scenarios. Now, it would be so interesting if with these experiments you could simulate 18 or more fires. because there were fires, which things happened that we expected, some that we didn't expect. So wouldn't it be interesting if you could simulate all this and draw even more conclusions than the conclusions we drew in these experiments? So it's great that this has been a success, and Ruud is going to show us a bit more about this, how with fire safety engineering and live experiments, how we can learn even more. I'm going to give the microphone to Ruud.